Good evening, everyone. My name is Ian Morrison, Chair of the Cowichan Valley Regional District. I'd like to welcome you all here this evening for the regular meeting of the board. Just before we get underway, I would like to acknowledge our meeting is taking place in the territory of the Coast Salish people. I'd like to welcome Alternate Director Justice and Alternate Director Ryan tonight to our meeting. And with that, I would turn to Mr. Barry in regards to approval of the agenda. Mr. Barry.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have two changes to the agenda. If we can add NB1, New Business 1, that's correspondence from North Cowichan regarding the proposed rezoning in Area D, Cowichan Bay, for marine manufacturing in the industrial zone. And the other would be to delete bylaw B1, that's the soil deposit bylaw, from this agenda.
So we have the approval of the agenda with those two changes. Moved by Director Marsh, seconded by Director Stone. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. For reference, for people who are in the audience who would like to provide input during the public input period in regards to the item that has just been deleted from the agenda, normally comments during public input are in regards to agenda items, but seeing we've just deleted that from the agenda, we will still welcome your comments during the public input period. It will be the same group of people that will be considering it at a future date. So anybody that had come for that specific purpose, please feel free to come up and make comments. And I'll also just make a real quick bit of advice for those that maybe haven't been here before. We're in a somewhat unusual circumstance in that we have just yesterday held a public hearing on a land use item. So if there's anyone that wanted to come and provide input during the public input period and was thinking that they would be providing input on that public hearing item, which would be the Tidal Harmony Holdings rezoning in the Cowichan Bay Estuary, that is prohibited from being discussed at this meeting in the public input period. So I just want to make sure everybody's completely clear. The board is unable to receive new information at this time following the close of the public hearing. Make sense? Director Sebring.
Just a point of, I guess, procedure. I heard some surprise in the audience with respect to the soil removal bylaw being pulled. Perhaps the CAO could explain, or staff could explain, why that decision was recommended today.
Is it the pleasure of the committee to have a brief explanation from the CAO? See lots of nodding. Mr. Carruthers.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Director
Mr. Chair.
Sebring.
We actually have a team of staff working at a fairly high pace right now to prepare the bylaw for implementation. Through that process, we've discovered a couple of areas within the bylaw that may need some revision before the board adopts the bylaw. We're also concerned that we have all of our provisions aligned with the adoption of the bylaw, so that when the bylaw is adopted, we're able to implement it immediately. And we don't want to leave any confusion in the community with regard to adopting the bylaw and not being able to implement it. So we're targeting to be back on April 10th, so the board can make a decision on implementation and adoption of the bylaw at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Carruthers.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Mr. Carruthers. I'll announce when it's time. Item number 3, Mr. Barry.
Adoption of the minutes of the regular board meeting of February 27th, 2019.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Smith. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed. The motion carries. Next item would go to any business arising, Mr. Barry.
No business arising?
Thank you. Now we go to the public input period. The rules around the public input period are on the board or on the screens. And I would now like to welcome anyone up who would like to provide input on any items on the agenda, or, if you wish, the soil deposit bylaw, since we've already explained that. Please come forward.
I'll be quick. Hi, my name is Dale Erb. I'm a property I'm a property owner at Shawnigan Lake, and I'd like to talk about the bylaw 4236. I'm asking to stop or table the final reading. This needs all public input. This needs stakeholders' input. I am not aware of any property owner or developer who knows that this bylaw is being considered for final approval. This bylaw would have such overall cost implications for affordability in the area. You have a judicial responsibility of obligation to consult with bylaw changes and concerns. I am strongly asking to stop and table this bylaw, create a balanced committee, inform, ask, then create a well-needed bylaw all about facts. I appreciate you, it sounds like you are back trying to straighten some things out. That's all I ask is that I'm a stakeholder. I've been coming and living at Shawnigan Lake for over 50 years. I'm 61 years old. I live at Shawnigan and I have a lot important, and I'm trying to do a lot for Shawnigan Lake, and your staff knows what I'm trying to do with some of my property. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to provide input to the board this evening?
Hi there, name is Mike Ferguson. I also, like Dale, own an acreage in South Shawnigan. I reside on that acreage. My children reside on that acreage. My children and I are clean water advocates. You know, our environment and our watershed is just as important to us as it is anybody. We actually live on Stebbings Road, okay? So we're a little closer to, I think, the real issues at hand here than I think the average resident. The implications of the bylaw are so outrageous with regards to costs for anybody looking to develop their land. Like, I mean, I'm just like any other parent here, guys. I want to essentially take my property, I want to make it usable so that my children and my grandchildren will be able to benefit from it one day. The costs that are being implied are absolutely over the top. I don't know of any other municipality that is even coming close to what you guys are suggesting here. So, you know, we all agree that there is a bylaw that needs to be put in place for clean soil. Nobody's saying that there isn't. We're all in favor of clean water, but there's a lot of things here, guys, that need to be considered. I live in Shawnigan Lake. I drink the water. And, you know, this thing just needs to be tabled because there's so much more that needs to be done and put into this before it can get passed. I mean, for you guys to pass this bylaw the way it's reading right now, wow, the effects are going to be massive. And, yeah, I mean, I could go on, but I know I don't want to take up the time. We only have a few minutes to speak. So, anyways, that's pretty much where what I'm asking of you guys is let's table this thing. Let's bring us together and, you know, a representative balance, just like Dale was saying, and let's figure this thing out together rather than shove something down people's throats that are essentially going to, you know, bankrupt them or, you know, I've got my whole life savings, guys, invested in this property. So, you know, we need to be fair to everybody here involved. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you very much. Please come to the microphone.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nirmal Joel. I'm the president of the Island Equipment Owner Association. I'm here to voice concern of the majority of our members on bylaw 4236. It needs to be rewritten with consultation from the industry. So I'm asking tonight that the bylaw be sent back to staff and that they consult with the industry and make it more workable. So the way it's written now, it's not only is it not good for our industry, it's not going to be good for you know, the cost of housing and many other things that it's going to affect. So thanks for your time, and hopefully we can put a committee together and do this the right way. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your input. Is there anyone else who would like to provide comment on items on the agenda, including the soil deposit bylaw?
My name's Al Brunette. I'm from Shawnigan Lake. I don't know, there was a letter sent to Director Acton yesterday to do with the rail and trail issue, and I don't know if she got a chance to circulate it to everyone or not. so you may not know what I'm talking about. But I'll say that whatever is in that letter at this point, I'm also here to support. But by extension, my big concern with the rail and trail proposal is that it's too much too soon. It's very expensive, and we are dealing with an issue that where we don't even know if the railroad is going to go through. So we're pushing through a trail, but we don't know what's happening with the railroad. And if perchance the railroad doesn't go through, which I expect that it will not, I can't see how it would, then we are wasting money on building a trail beside a rail where we could be using the rail bed. So my request, and the feeling of a lot of people in Shawnigan, is that that entire project, it has been started, which is okay, but the entire project now should be held off until such time as we know what's happening with the railroad. Because if the railroad does not end up to be a railroad, or it takes 20 years for it to get together, there are things that can be done with the rail bed now. And I'm not 100% sure where ICF is at in their deliberations. I know that I have not seen a viable business plan. I don't know how they will plan to make money. I think that, from my point of view, it'll end up to be a gigantic white elephant that might never get off the ground. In the meantime, all we're doing is growing weeds and not accommodating tourism and not doing any good for the area. So the request, in short, is put a hold on the trail until we know what's happening with the railroad. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Al. Would anyone else like to provide input to the board tonight? And just a reminder, items on the agenda and the soil deposit bylaw, but no reference to any of the material covered in last night's public hearing. Please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Directors. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to give some input here. We live on the Malahide, and we're Frank and Sheila Ryan, and our family also lives there. There's 3 generations of us there, our son and his wife and grandchildren, and we intend to be there for a long time. We do a clean fill site, and we
meeting year after year and hearing this thing being up for revision again. Mr. Chair, I hope that this is revised and it goes to next board meeting, because we need something to stop the people from contaminating our watershed. Too bad that there's always those people around that spoil it for everyone. But that's the way it is. We have to have at least equivalent fees to what the CRD has to reduce the number of trucks coming over and dumping sometimes garbage in our watershed. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else that would like to provide input to the board this evening? Got a few minutes left. Welcome.
Hello. My name is Wendy Watt, and I'm from Victoria. I have been in the industry of gravel and aggregate for about 18 years now. My history is the gravel pit in Victoria, and we took in a lot of clean fill from the Victoria area. We made sure it was proper. We used it to create the Royal Bay subdivision. It is possible to do it properly and correctly. It takes the diligence of a lot of people that put effort into it and are creating futures for their family. Sorry. And a lot of our local guys in the industry in Victoria, this is their livelihood. This is what they do for work. It's their business. It's how they're providing a future for their family. So we understand the concerns about water and environment. It's also causing a lot of emissions. From the further the trucks go, the worse it is on the environment in general. So we just ask for input when it comes to the bylaw, as a little bit of input from the industry itself, so that we can work with you and we can be prepared for whatever changes are to come. Doesn't mean that we can't accept changes, but we just would like to have a little bit of, a lot of our guys work on contracts. The contracts are a year or two behind, and there's a lot of accommodation that would have to happen if they are to take fill to a different site or to realign what they're doing with their industry and their businesses too. So we thank you for tabling it tonight, and we would hope that there would be a little bit more communication in general.
Thank you very much. I think we've got a couple of minutes. We could squeeze in one more if there's someone who would like to come forward and provide us with some more input. Looks like everyone's had their opportunity. Excellent. We'll go to the next item on the agenda. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for showing your concern and showing up tonight. Next item, I gather we're going to have a few folks leave us, so maybe we'll give them a couple of minutes to depart. The next item will be delegations. Mr. Barry.
Yes, Mr. Chair. The first delegation, Nick Versteeg, documentary presentation, A Just Society.
Well, good evening. My name is Nick Versteeg. I'm a documentary filmmaker here in the Cowichan Valley, as some of you might know. For the last 1.5 years, we've been working on a very serious documentary about our crisis with opiates in Cowichan and in Victoria. We're going to show this documentary on March 28th, and I come personally here to invite you all to be at that evening, because this is an evening where I think the decision makers and politicians like yourself have to listen to not only the documentary, but even more important, the 1 hour or longer discussion that we will have on stage with a variety of people that are involved with the opioid crisis. Let me show you a little trailer.
Although Canadians today are richer than ever, the gap between average and medium households' wealth has grown, and so has our poverty rate. 1 in 10 Canadians was considered poor, and it's rising. The child poverty rate is growing, And how is it possible that in 2017 in Canada, 3,987 people died of opiate-related abuse, 1,399 in British Columbia alone?
I was in fuming with this doctor, right? Why is I be sick and trying to get answers, and sick from not having painkillers, opiates. And anyway, there was a guy sitting in the lobby, funny enough, waiting for the doctor or finished with the doctor. When I stormed out of the office, he went out of the office with me, and he said, hey, he said, what are you doing all that argument for? He said, I can give you something for $10 and all your pain goes away.
The cycle of addiction versus, homelessness is just hand in hand, and it's not going to change anytime soon. And I watch people die all the time. I usually carry a Noxalone kit with me to help people that overdose, but it's just a cycle that goes round and round, and it's just not going to change anytime soon.
So most of the treatment in Canada and certainly on the island is private treatment, which is fairly expensive for most people and not accessible. So this specific program that we're operating has no cost to the individual that's accessing the program, and everybody will leave the program with a job and a place to live.
Last night we had Michelle Staples, our City of Duncan mayor. She came in and really, it's not even about talking, she just really listened.
To have the mayor come in, like last night we had the mayor come in and she, we get to voice our opinion right to the mayor. That's a big thing, right, for us. We never get that heard anywhere else.
I don't think any society or culture has a best formula for today's problems, as we can see from the dysfunction in so many areas. But we do each have the elements of best practices or ways to create a better society and learn from our past journeys. There are lessons from all of these journeys of the past that we need to integrate into a plan for a better future society, a just society.
We took the idea, actually came 2 years ago when I was in Holland. I had lunch with a colleague, a film producer in Holland. We had done a co-production together. And I was telling him that people had died of opiate overdoses. And he says, in Canada? I said, no. In Canada, it's about 4,000 that year. He was completely shocked. And he says, how is it possible? And you saw that's the premise that we took. How is it possible that in a country as rich as Canada, 4,000 people die every year, and it's growing? It's, again, was higher. So what we have done, we have created, of course, we always have to watch out what we can film and what we cannot film, but we had fantastic help. Social services, Cowichan helped us tremendously, Warmland helped us, Our Place helped us. We cannot film everything that happens on the street, so don't expect a sensationalized documentary. It's a pretty straightforward story where we're asking a variety of questions. And even so, that sets the talk that we're going to have on stage with about 5 to 6 people that are involved on the stage. And I hope that you take the time that evening. We did it on an evening that you don't have a meeting. I hope I planned that right. But I hope you'll all be there because it's very important, I think, for you to listen to the ideas. You will see in the documentary we have ideas that we ask people what they would do about it. At the discussion, there will be other ideas. We don't have an illusion that we're going to solve the whole opiate crisis that evening, but at least we can start a discussion. So I hope you all be there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Does anyone have any questions? Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Verteeg. Thank you very much. We did see this at North Cowichan last week, but we actually have 2 meetings during the day on the 28th and the 29th of March, all day of strategic planning. And so there may be the odd person who couldn't come because they will have to have their minds going. Are you going to record it so that if someone couldn't come, they could still hear the panel discussion?
We have not talked about it, but we could definitely have a camera out there, I think, to record it.
I think that would be helpful because I can't speak for my colleagues, but some of us are over a certain age and might find it difficult to get out an evening before, in the middle of 2 long days. So
No
that would be
problem.
wonderful if that could be recorded. Thank you. And thank you so much for, you talked a bit at North Cowichan, I think, about the emotional cost for your crew to do this work.
It is.
And I just thank you for doing it.
You're welcome.
Director Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Nick. That was very informative. Can you just tell me again what date and time that was, so I can put it in
It's
my
March 28th. We start at 7 with showing the documentary, and the discussion will be from about 8 till 9:30. Before, we have Stacy Middlemiss, who has set up, and maybe some of you have seen it, a beautiful exposition on the stigma room. So every person that comes in the theater goes through this stigma room into the foyer. So come a little earlier because he has done a tremendous amount of work to set up an exhibition on this issue.
And that's the
That's
Cowichan
in the Cowichan Center.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to my friend Nick. I'd like to thank you for this. I know it's going to be a deep, sad presentation, but something that needs to be seen. But I also, on another level, want to thank you for what you've done in the community in the past for many different films and how many times you volunteered in the community to open our eyes. And I really appreciate that, and I wish you luck. I know you've moved out of Cowichan Bay and moved into Victoria now. So I just wanted to make that public presentation and thank you to you for all the things you've done for our community.
Thank you, Laurie. It's for the other directors. I didn't leave the Cowichan Valley because I didn't like it here. We have loved it here. My wife and I are going to take at least a year off. We're going to live a year in France and do some. I actually not going to do anything for an entire year. We're going to just travel and take a break. I will not stop making documentaries, but I need a year to not because of the documentary that I just did, but yeah, I have to. I'm married, and you have to. You know what? When your wife says, "Hey, listen, we planned this for a long time. Let's do it." So, thank you, Laurie.
A year off. That's rough. A year off in France. Real rough. Director Staples.
Yeah, actually, it was the same thing that Laurie just said. I want to thank you because I was lucky enough to be involved with this production in a very backseat sort of way. But seeing you go through the process and that this almost didn't happen for a number of different reasons, and you pushed through it, and I just really appreciate that because it was a hard thing to push through. And so I want to thank you for that. And then for everything that you've brought to us as a community, because you've brought more, I think, than you can imagine, and brought us together in so many different ways and around so many different issues that we wouldn't have been able to talk about in the way that we have been able to or understand without you being able to walk us through and show us these things from a different perspective. So I just really want to thank you and have a wonderful journey. And I know I'll see you again before you go, but not in this way. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I can actually, if I can point out, can Hilton and Bill, if you can both stand up for a second. Those two people made it possible that we actually could finish the production.
Thank you very much. All of your hard work is very much appreciated, and good luck on that.
You're welcome.
At your event.
We see you all on the 28th.
Excellent.
Because I'm 70 years, and we're working here, so no excuses of ages. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much, Nick. Mr. Barry.
Delegation number 2, Sherry Durnford, Friends of Rails to Trails regarding non-motorized trail option for the ENN rail corridor.
Welcome, Sherry.
Well, thank you, Chair Morrison and the directors.
I understand that you've had a long day today, so I'll try to be as concise and brief as possible. And thank you very much for having our delegation today. We have a number of people here in the gallery that are very interested in this issue as well. Just because there's so many new faces at the table, I'd just like to if you could just put up your hand if you are aware of the ownership structure of the Island Corridor Foundation. Is everybody aware of the Island Corridor Foundation structure? Sounds good. So you all know that you have effectively a 12th interest in the Island Corridor Foundation. Good. Okay. Now I'm just working. Oh, I think I've had this problem before coming here. Unfortunately, I just. Your stick. There we go. Oh, good. Okay. So what is this? So it's the one that is. What's it called? It's called. Sure. Well, I hope that I got it here. It was saved to this. Could we go into PowerPoint and then pull it up from PowerPoint? Oh, okay. Okay. It'll be right at the top, but should be. CPRD. There we go. That one. Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, so a little bit about Friends of Rails to Trails.
Sherry, for everybody at home, could you please use the microphone?
Oh,
Because
sure.
we're live streaming. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just so you know a little bit about our background, Friends of Rails to Trails started when a group of neighbors got together and we all said, we're walking along this trail beside the railway, but we can only go a limited distance. So we all ended up hopping onto the rail track because that's how you get beyond Stocking Creek. And so we got together as a group. I didn't realize how many people had been looking at that rail saying this would be such an ideal trail. Actually, I'll cover it off a little bit later, but we at this point we have over 3,500 petition signatures asking that the rail be converted to a trail. Now, I'm just having a look here for the slideshow, and let's just try to get the from beginning, I guess. Okay, oh, it still doesn't allow me to just do the full thing. Is it this one? See, no. I just don't want that there beside it.
So that's it. That's all not
okay.
there.
Okay, thanks. First of all, what we looked at is the viability of the rail, because the viability of the rail, as Al had mentioned earlier, is critical to the ongoing function of that area, that beautiful gem that we hold. It's not suitable for a modern railway for a number of reasons. Geotechnically, it was built, over 100 years ago, and at that time, there was a lot of different rules, and there was also a very much lesser expectation of speed. There are, I understand, 240 at-road crossings on the total the 224 kilometers long. So you can imagine how many road crossings there are. Just in the Globe and Mail on March the 6th, there was a reference to that rail crossing accidents are way up. I guess drivers are getting less patient. 1,170 major accidents in Canada last year on rail. Also, we've got deteriorated bridges, trestles, and footings that can't support heavy loads. The configuration isn't suitable to higher speeds, as I mentioned. There's a larger capital and operating costs for a quite small population. Often I hear us being referred to in comparison with Europe. Europe is a totally different population from Vancouver Island. So why does rails with trails not work? Because, of course, that's what the Island Corridor Foundation has been promoting. Basically, regional districts are investing huge sums of money to put trails adjacent to the unused rail bed that already has the foundations for an excellent trail. The Capital Regional District alone had a $36 million budget for putting trails beside the rails. That's a huge amount of money. Grant monies can help, they defray things, but that means that we don't get that grant money for really important other infrastructure items. We also have numerous property owners, including the Snonass Nation, and I think you're aware of that one. But there's also people at Shawnigan Lake, there's people within the Cowichan Valley that are really looking at their property access seriously compromised by safety fences if that rail doesn't go through, none will be needed. There's a deterioration of areas around the trails that we're putting in, and a wonderful example is up just north of Stocking Creek. If you go by there, there are tree stumps all over the place where there used to be really nice trees. Down in the Shawnigan area, if that trail goes through, you're going to be taking out some magnificent large trees. We're looking at great compromise to a bog, which is something that, I mean, none of us really enjoy bogs, but nature does. There's just a sizably environmentally undesirable attribute to having the trail beside the rail. And there are many areas, 40 in the regional district of Nanaimo alone, where trails can't continue because of major crossing impediments. So, very important. Now, the ENN main corridor is 224 kilometers long. In Parksville to Port Alberni, it's 64 kilometers. It has the attribute of being able to be connected to the Galloping Goose and to the Duncan to Shawnigan Lake, which I understand is also part of the old unused corridor. We look at these and say, what tremendous success we have with these trails that we put on rails. So we've got a tremendous opportunity here. Why not a world-class trail? The corridor is ideal for a trail. It's narrow, it's fairly flat, it's perfect for walking, cycling, horseback riding, and non-gas motorized activities in the waves. And I say, of course, non-gas is because of electric bikes. It will provide tremendous economic opportunities for local communities through tourism-related items, and it's a great example there are some great examples of rail trails that have been highly successful throughout North America and Europe. Build it and they will come. Let's not get left behind. Actually, I think my husband had a better expression, but it said, don't miss the train. At any rate, but what we really, this is a trend in our society, just like we got past stagecoaches and horse-drawn carriages. This is a trend in our society. People are moving more and more to active transportation. Active meaning they're doing it. So if we look at the benefits, it bypasses the main highways for pedestrians and cyclists, creates demand for local facilities, food, accommodation, and services. It also provides an opportunity to our First Nations neighbors. And that's really important. As a matter of fact, when we went to do a Snonass presentation, the chief and band council all said, we were promised that with the rail, we would get jobs. We haven't seen any jobs. So part of their problem is that it hasn't provided them with economic opportunity. Of course, the other part of the problem is that it goes right through the middle of their property. So the thing about a rail trail is that it provides safe and direct connections between communities, especially for children, senior citizens, and those with mobility issues. And it provides a really healthy form of transportation. So with more than 3,500 petitioners, we just incorporated as a society on January 8th. We opened a bank account. We've already had over 40 donations. We've got a growing number of memberships coming in. So the people who want to see a rail instead of a trail are it's amazing. There's a lot of people out there. Also, if you go into the active transportation study that's being conducted by the province right now, you will find that about 30% of the people that have commented in that, and it's for the whole province, are from the Cowichan Valley. So please do have a look at that, because it gives you an opportunity to see how much and how many people there are behind getting this rail converted to a trail. The Regional District of Nanaimo asked to have the ICF look at their portion of the corridor from Parksville to Courtney, converted to a trail. Similar requests from the Village of Cumberland and the City of Nanaimo, except of course where it's being used right now for a very short distance for transportation of dangerous goods. The ICF, unfortunately, at this point has not really considered it. We have tried to get about 3 meetings together with the ICF. We did meet with Graham Bruce in the past. We feel that we are actually quite a valuable resource for the Island Corridor Foundation, and they're not paying attention to us. So we would like to see, we would like to work with them. Okay, how much are we willing to pay for nostalgia? And that's what we're talking about here right now, is nostalgia. The provincial study, IBI, that was done in 2010 estimated $600 million for capital cost and about a $20 per passenger trip subsidy, and that was back in 2010, before further the last 10 years of deterioration. There's the alignment and geometry with S-curves that make it extremely difficult, well, impossible to have better speeds. So we're looking at slow, we're looking at costly, and we're looking at a huge number of uncontrolled level crossings, which it presents a huge liability issue for the Island Corridor Foundation and thereby you people as well. We have an insufficient population at this time to really support a high-speed transportation network. But, I mean, I'm sure it will come, but putting a trail in there for the time being does not preclude it. Stantec also concluded that if they put in rail service, it wouldn't divert more than 1% of the Malahat's traffic load. So it doesn't have a huge effect on the Malahat, unfortunately, in the configuration that it would be in at this time.
Sherry, you've got about 2 minutes left.
Okay, thanks. So we've got no progress in the last 10 years on getting a rail forward. We've got increasing evidence that the modern and efficient high-speed passenger service is not viable. There's little freight demand as the island shifts from a resource-based community, and a lot of truckers would be very concerned if we did have a rail going from Port Alberni to Nanaimo. So we're back where we started. We need a better use for this valuable community asset. We need the ICF to manage it responsibly. So recent developments, I've already mentioned that, of course, the province is looking at another study, yet another study. I think there's been 4 or 5 studies so far, and all of them have concluded the same thing. It will be great when we have a higher population. We have active transportation study now being initiated, and I really recommend that you go and have a look at it. If you haven't already heard the news, the Alberni route going to the McMillan Mill is closing down because they just feel that the $4,200 per run that's required as a subsidy to the already, I think it was about $50 to take the trip, and they just can't support it, so they are closing that route. There are legal issues that need to be explored. Some bias, I think, has been given to the directors and stakeholders, and this, I think, is one of the key issues. I would be happy to speak with any of you that would like to address this, the legal issue, and I don't have enough time here, or I don't think this is the proper place to address that. But I think that there's some information that needs to be presented to you. Our vision is to remove the rails and repurpose the rail bed for a multi-use community trail, and we believe this is economically viable. and this would be at a fraction of the cost. We already show tremendous volunteer support and commercial support of having a trail on the rail. So please do look at this. Now, what your board can do, please ensure that both the provincial and the municipal support of the corridor is fact-based. Very important. We don't want to base major decisions on emotions.
Sherry, can you hang on for a sec? Are you almost concluding? You're
This
well
is my
over,
last
you're
one.
well over your time, and
Oh, sorry.
Is everybody
Oh, I'm
fine with
sorry.
her continuing? Okay,
Okay,
please, thank you.
okay. And I'm sure the CFVRD has an active and accountable presence on the ICF board. Determine what subsidies you are providing to the ICF currently through parking charges, road crossing maintenance, grants, and other charges to understand what the costs to the CVRD are, because not everybody knows that. Request the ICF work with Friends of Rails to Trails Vancouver Island. And this is my final one. Thank you very much, Director Morrison, for your tolerance. And we appreciate the opportunity to show to you our vision of a world-class trail that would bring lots of tourists, provide safe commuting for many of our residents, and provide an active lifestyle. And of course, we have our website, www.fortvi.ca. Thank you very much. And if any questions.
Thank you very much. I've got a couple of directors that would like to pose questions. I've got Director Kuhn, followed by Director Smith. Director Kuhn.
Thank you for your presentation. I happen to believe what you're saying. I'm very suspicious about the ICF and the plan to build out the rail, because I happen to believe that we just don't have the population to justify it, and I think it'll be at least 50 years until we have that population. So I'm much in favor, but my question to you is this. Yes, it would be very expensive to build that rail. It would be prohibitively expensive, actually. But it would also be expensive to make a trail out of that. So there's enormous costs involved in that as well.
Director Kuhn, thank you very much for your question. We have actually done some initial research. We talked to WestCan Rail and one other rail company. They were of the opinion that the value of pulling up the iron of the tracks and selling off the ties. Believe it or not, they do sell the ties off to a place south of Seattle that uses it for hog fuel. And they believe that it would pretty much offset it. So that would give us the base. It wouldn't give us like an asphalt topping or even a really fine gravel topping, but it would give us the base from which to work. Our thought is that at that point, we would work with the ICF to sell off, you can buy a kilometer of this rail, and we will put a plaque up to recognize you and have a cost associated with that. And I believe that there are a number of businesses that would be very interested, assuming that that cost is not prohibitive.
Well, you're very enthusiastic. I enjoy that, and thank you for that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Director Smith.
Hi, thank you very much, Sherry, for your presentation. I have a couple of questions. Have you, in New Zealand, the trail that goes from the Twin Coast across near the top of North Island of New Zealand, a section of that, they've gravelled in between the rail tracks, and I'm wondering if that's something that you've looked at exploring and not necessarily pulling up the train tracks. Has that been explored at all?
Ms. Durnburn.
Thank you, Director Smith. Actually, we have looked at, a number of people have said different finishes that they would aspire to us having. I think that actually I leave that with the Island Corridor Foundation, given that they would work with us. And I think that different areas might have different things. If the owners of the Island Corridor Foundation so deemed it, that would be a temporary solution that could be looked at to see how popular this wonderful asset that we have really is.
Follow-up question?
Have you also looked at partnering with the parks within BC? In New Zealand, they've, on their spiking trails, they've partnered with their parks there. And has that been explored for looking at this sort of being considered part of our BC parks system?
We haven't actually looked at that. What we're at all yet, but it would be worthwhile. Again, we need to have the Island Corridor Foundation basically accept that at least from Nanaimo North, the possibility of any kind of rail within the next 50 years is highly improbable. From Nanaimo North, there just isn't that much population or that much transportation. So, but definitely a good thing to investigate.
Concluding remarks, Director Smith?
Yes, I support turning the train into a trail. I had an opportunity to do the Otago Trail in New Zealand. It's approximately 350 kilometers. It is amazing, and the amount of tourism and value. We're always looking for economic development here in the Cowichan Valley, and this would be an opportunity for that. So I support the direction that this group is headed.
Could I respond to that just briefly?
Please.
The mayor of Wallace, which is a town of 400 people down in Coeur d'Alene, was at the Vancouver Adventure Show a couple weekends ago, and he tells me that they get $3 million a year of economic benefit to this small village because of the rail trail that they have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Durnford. Next item, report from the chairperson. This is a little bit hastily pulled together, and I'm going to put a couple of our colleagues on the spot here. And quite hastily, yesterday I received a request from Chief Seymour from Cowichan Tribes to attend with our MLA and our Member of Parliament to their offices this morning at 8 a.m. And with including those individuals, Mayor Staples, Mayor Stone, and who else did we have there? Mayor Sebring sitting right there. And it was a very important call for support to stand together in regards to some issues around racism. And I was wanting to just take a moment to ask our mayor colleagues and fellow directors if they might just say a couple of words of what this morning's event meant to them. And I guess we'll go, as they do, counterclockwise, go to Director Sebring first. Would you mind sharing a few words?
This is sort of off the cuff. I wasn't expecting this, but the event this morning was precipitated by a press release that Chief Seymour issued yesterday. And that press release is in response to some things that have happened on Cowichan Tribes land recently, things that are ostensibly connected to the Teddy animal cruelty case. I spent some time, as I said at our event this morning, I spent some time very early today. Social media can be both a blessing and a curse, but when I looked at some of the posts on Cowichan Tribes related Facebook pages, and I'm not talking about Cowichan Tribes specifically, but pages started by their members, and I saw some of the graffiti and I read some of the experiences of some of the people on Cowichan Tribes lands with respect to some of the things they're seeing and hearing in community. I was aghast. It appears that there's a small component of our broader community that is keeping racism very much alive. And as I said at the event this morning, it's critical that we, as leadership in this valley, stand united and stand against that. Chief Seymour was very clear. He asked for sort of the tensions to be ratcheted down and for people to let the legal system and the court system do its job. And I think we all concurred with that. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Director Sebring. Director Staples.
Oops.
I think that Mayor Sebring provided us a good summary with what led up to today and what took place this morning. The only thing that I would add to it is that to see everyone in the room when we all showed up, and Mayor Sebring talked about this today, we have strong relationships here in our community, and it was standing together, but it was also standing with the chief and with the community to let everyone know, every Cowichan member, every First Nations person in our region, or in their region, because that's really where we are, know that this is not acceptable. This isn't how we treat people here. This isn't what we're going to. Just the mere act of us not standing up and saying something is giving it permission to happen. And so to me, what today did was to say, we're not going to just stand by silently. We can't be silent about this. People are afraid to go to their houses. People are afraid to go to restaurants. People are afraid to let their dogs outside. That's the type of conversation that's happening because of the way that they're being treated. So today, to me, it showed us how far we've come, and it showed me how far we have to go. It did both of those things. And I was very grateful for the opportunity to be there with everyone, and that the chief, in spite of all the things that are being heard and being said, opens his doors to all of us to come in, to stand with him and with the community. And so today I think I felt a lot of sadness about why we had to be there, but I also felt proud of all of us for being there. It was kind of that double-edged sword, I guess, in a way, but not very proud of what's happening in the community, because, I hear stories all the time from people in Victoria, and my partner works for the Friendship Centre in Victoria, so I hear a lot of stories about this region, and they're not good. And I know that that's not all we are. And so one of the things someone reported to me very soon after that press release was put out yesterday was that there was a lot more social media that was calling it out and not allowing it anymore. And that was really what we asked people to do today, was to don't stand by, stand up for each other. This isn't who we are. And so let's become who we are. So thanks for bringing this up, Director Morrison.
Thank you for your comments. Director Stone.
Thank you, and both of my colleagues have already expressed quite well, I think, the experience and that combination of sadness and hope and warmth that we were welcomed under much less than ideal circumstances. It was a strong statement to see all of us together, and how Chief Seymour welcomed us all. And it makes us reflect on the relationships that we have developed and how warm and loving they are, and the strength of those relationships. But it also was a cold, sad reminder of how far we have to go in our broader community. And the tragedy that befell Teddy is an individual tragedy that was a result of actions of a human being, not of any specific race or area or anything like that. These kinds of cases are not confined. They come up all over our country, all over the world, all of the time. So we need to separate the issues, and as the chief called for, as well as our other colleagues at the federal and provincial governments, was to let the process and the justice system go through that process and deal with the issue on an individual basis. But we need to take a step back and reflect on the relationships that we continue to build, and encourage our community members to reach out and do that. And I will say that when I took the opportunity early this morning as well to see social media, the encouraging sign I saw was the amount of people that, when they became aware of what was happening, that stood up, much like we were asked to do this morning, to defend people and say, this has got nothing to do with race. This is about a dog that was mistreated badly by an individual. And that's the perspective we need to take on it. So Yeah, I thank you, Chair Morrison, for bringing it up. And it was a sober, somber event, but the way that we sat in that room and the feeling that I got was, there's a ray of sunshine in those clouds, and that the feeling that we had in that room all being together. And, this morning, Mayor Sebring said it well. We all come from different political stripes and have different perspectives on things, but there are some things we are completely united on, and that is that relationship and the bond that's growing between the First Nations and our non-First Nations communities, and I'm very proud to be part of that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Director Stone, and I'll be brief in my remarks in that, I'm not fully aware of all of the specific details around this, but I found something to be quite profound, and that was, it was fairly late notice. We got notice yesterday. And it was a call to the mayor's, call to the chair, call to the school board president, and it was a call that this was important, and it was a call by Chief Seymour. And the perspective that I had in this was, we were at a public hearing last night. We all have a very long day today, and it was tools down and show up and do the right thing. And it was that profound sense of, as Director Staples said, it was coming together to stand up for something that was right, and I felt very proud to be part of it, and glad that I could bring it to the board tonight, and for all of you for sharing. And the next part, which I've been a little remiss on, but we talk about celebrating some of the good things that happen around here once in a while. And I just wanted to take a brief moment. I'm going to pass this around, and after I refer to it, we received an award. Actually, our staff have received an award. This is an award of excellence in regards to the Cowichan River Flood Protection Program. And I'll pass this around, and could you pass that, please, counterclockwise as we should. This is attention Kate Miller, Manager Environmental Services, Cowichan Valley Regional District, and it's the ACEC Award Plaque, Cowichan River Flood Protection Program. And it says, on behalf of Parsons, we would like to thank you for the opportunity to work together on such an interesting and challenging project. We would like to pass on a copy of the ACEC Award Plaque for your organization. We look forward to working with you again in the future. This is the flood control program that has been such an important part of protecting homes and part of the community, and I think it's a great thing when our staff in this organization are recognized for some of the fine work that they do. And I don't know, would you like to add anything, Mr. Crothers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me, other than to add that it was certainly a partnership, and credit has to be given as well to our partners at Cowichan Tribes, as well as staff at the City of Duncan and Municipality of North Cowichan who also participated in that process.
So everybody have a look at the award, and I'll send the letter around, and it's a nice thing to be recognized. There's our member municipalities are often award winners of various things, and I think it's great that we can share good news like that. Do you want to give a little clap? All right. Mr. Berry, what's next?
We would be moving on, Mr. Chair, to the committee commission reports, and the first one would be CR1, the recommendations from the Regional Services Committee meeting of February 27th. Director Stone.
Report and recommendations of the Regional Services Committee meeting of February 27, 2019 are: number one, that the Tourism Cowichan Society 2019 annual work plan and financials as outlined in the February 13, 2019 Economic Development Division staff report to the February 27, 2019 Regional Services Committee be received. And number two, that the Regional Tourism Services Contribution Agreement for the period commencing March 1st, 2019 and ending September 30th, 2022 as outlined in the February 13th, 2019 Economic Development Division staff report to the February 27th, 2019 Regional Services Committee be approved. And I move those items.
seconded by Director Sebring. Any discussion on those items? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed? The motion carries. Does that conclude your report? Yes, that concludes my report. Thank you. CR2.
Would be the report and recommendations of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of March 6th. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Oh, thank you. Your report and recommendations of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of March 6 is that one recommendation that a grant and aid for Electoral Area I, Yubo Mead Creek, in the amount of $500 be provided to the Lake Cowichan School for a bursary for a graduating student residing in Electoral Area I, Yubo Mead Creek.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on that item? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? That motion carries.
That is my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Yanni DiNardo. CR3.
The report and recommendations of the Special Corporate Services Committee meeting that was held this morning. Director Marsh.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Your Corporate Services Committee reports and recommends that the 2019 property tax notice insert follow the 2018 format with the addition of a link to Schedule E of the budget.
Move that item. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Director Smith. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. CR4.
The report and recommendations of the Community Services Committee meeting from this afternoon. Director McGonigal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Berry, your Community Services Committee reports and recommends as follows: that the contract for services agreement renewal with the Cowichan Seniors Community Foundation to provide supported transportation services for seniors for an additional year commencing April 1st, 2019, for the annual fee of $20,000 be approved. Number two, that the 5-year transit community partnership agreement with Halalt First Nation commencing October 1st, 2019, for conventional transit service as outlined in the February 15th, 2019 report from the Facilities and Transit Division be approved. 3, that a 10-year renewable park permit commencing in 2019 for the Cowichan Valley Schools Heritage Society to install and manage commemorative historic school signs at the Saltaire Community Center in Missachi Lake Park be approved. Number 4, that the existing permit to construct agreement with the BC Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure for Mayor Lake Park in Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake, Scotts Falls, be renewed for a further 5 years, expiring May 13th, 2024. Number 5, that a permit to construct agreement with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure for the installation and maintenance of a pedestrian crosswalk and separated roadside pathway between North Watts Road and Glen Avenue in Saltaire as part of the Cowichan Valley Trail Saltaire Rail with Trail Connector project be approved. And finally, number 6, that the Somenos Marsh Conservation Area Management Plan 2016 to 2026 in brackets developed by Madrona Environmental and Somenos Management Committee be endorsed. I would move those recommendations.
Seconded by Alternate Director Ryan. Any discussion on any of those items? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? If there's none opposed, the motion carries. I gather that concludes reports. No director's reports. Mr. Berry, number 12.
Staff report number 1 from the Manager of Communications and Engagement regarding public engagement policy. There are 2 parts to the recommendation. I'm actually going to read you the recommendation, but I'm going to change the order. Number 2, that the public engagement policy dated February 28th, 2019 be approved. If you approve that, then you can go on to the next one and repeal. You don't want to repeal if the second one doesn't go through.
Recommendation number 2 is moved. Seconded by Director Marsh. Any discussions, questions? Director Marsh.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. to Mr. Schumacher. I just wanted to compliment you on the public engagement, the policy, and how beautifully it was laid out. And I think you really captured in it what the board has been striving for, and I really look forward to seeing it unrolled. Thank you very much.
Director Stowe.
Thank you. Similar sentiments as Director Marsh, but I did want to highlight that there's still more work to go in the supporting pieces for this. But having taken more of an interest in public engagement as it's become more and more a key role in local government over the last several years, I think this is a great update and framework, especially going from where we were to where we want to go. And the fact that the policy recognizes the supporting work that is required underneath this, I think is a key piece. And then, of course, I think as directors and as a board, we all realize that the real engagement comes up to us to implement and work these policies so that they're the most effective, and continually look to improve this. So it's a great step forward. So thank you.
Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Schumacher, I have a question about the new policy outlines. It says, it mentions volunteers, that it applies to volunteer. You list everybody, but you include volunteers. And I'm curious how we can expect to put volunteers on that list. But also later in number 5, under roles, you don't mention volunteers. So perhaps volunteers shouldn't be in the policy, or what was your thinking behind that?
Mr. Schumacher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Director Acton. The roles is more specific to the planning of engagement activities and how that's done internally, as opposed to the delivery necessarily of those. But the essence of how those are delivered will be applicable. It's essentially a coverall for anybody who's kind of delivering CVRD services or business out in the community, or may be involved in the actual activities related to public engagement.
Follow up.
So and you also mentioned a handbook, so would there be one specifically maybe for volunteers and in our volunteer policy of how they should conduct themselves if it was, to me, engagement could even be, say our commission chairs are doing Facebook, or there's many opportunities for volunteers to be doing public engagement.
Mr. Schumacher.
I guess I would have to say yes. It would be applicable in that case to commission chairs.
Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two things, and Director Acton has already brought up one of them. I do question a little bit the notion of expecting engagement and what amounts to political accountability from people who volunteer their time. It's not like they're elected officials. I mean, we see it sometimes, and we've seen it in some of the APCs around here. I've seen it in some of the volunteer committees that we have at our municipality, where sometimes we put too big an expectation on them. I mean, to me, they're there to provide advice, but they're not. The danger is that they become perceived by the public as being politically accountable the way we are around this table, and I would just caution us that we take that into account when we write this policy. And the other piece is just a little bit of wordsmithing that I found a little bit awkward when I look at, and having said that, I love what you've done here, don't get me wrong, but under your point 1, commitment to participation, 1A, values-based, and this is a CVRD policy, remember, and it says values-based, meaningful participation is focused on talking to people about what matters most to them and what matters most to you. Who's you? I think it should just be what matters most to them. I mean, I just found that a little clunky. It jumped off the page at me because it begs the question, who's you in this context? So I'll leave it.
Would you like to respond?
Yes,
Mr. Schumacher.
Mr. Chair, through you to Director Sebring, these are taken directly from IAP2. So rather than try to change the wording of what is kind of universally accepted within there, I believe you to mean the collective you of the organization, or in this case, the board, where meaning that engagement is a two-way kind of conversation or street of understanding, not just what's important to the community, but also the community understanding maybe some of the constraints that are before the organization or the board.
With all due respect, then maybe we should, and I don't want to wordsmith this to death, but maybe it should reflect that, because the you is rather nebulous. We might want to say what matters most to the CVRD or to the organization. I mean, you means nothing in this. If it's a policy, who's you? That's all.
Point well taken.
Points been taken. Director Smith?
I would like, through the chair to staff, ask, how does this relate with our partners here at the table for their munis or their town? Do they also have a public engagement policy that's exactly the same as this, or are theirs different?
Mr. Schumacher?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The answer to that, I guess I was remiss in not acknowledging the work that was done prior in terms of developing the initial policy. This new policy very much carries a spirit and essence of what had already been adopted by the previous board. But this was done very much in conjunction with my counterparts at North Cowichan, as well as the regional district in Nanaimo, through a few different working sessions where we compared best practices, policies from a number of different municipalities and districts across the country. And they too are working on their own public engagement policies, which will be, I believe, going before the North Cowichan Council in the next couple of weeks. And Nanaimo, who currently has a policy, will be getting theirs revised as well in the near future. So this was done with that in mind, keeping in mind kind of our regional approach and partnership. So I would fully expect potentially some of the other municipalities to adopt something hopefully similar to this, using this as a framework in the future going forward.
Director Stone?
So yeah, we actually adopted the IAP2 framework as our guiding principles system for public engagement, and our communications staff is updating our policy just to refer directly to that. It's actually not as detailed as this, but it just states that we use the IAP2 framework.
Director
And
Sebring?
that is solely the jurisdiction of the municipalities.
Absolutely. Director Sebring?
To be clear, we already have a public engagement policy also based on IAP2, which is being revised and updated, and I think sort of along the lines of what Director Stone was saying, simplified somewhat. I was part of a committee about 4 years ago that put it together. We really got down into the weeds on it, and we're trying to back off a little and do some better high-level principle stuff. So,
Director Smith to conclude.
So should the munis and the CVRD public engagement policy not be the same? So that when we are doing public engagement, it's equal and there's no confusion?
Mr. Schumacher?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Director Smith, they will be very similar, I believe, and again, in their kind of in the language that's used, in their spirit and the commitments that they make. I think, each municipality or district has a little bit of a different spin on it, but essentially the idea is that exactly what you're saying, that when people are engaging with their local governments, that the expectations are the same, regardless of whether they're going to an event held by North Cowichan or one held by the CVRD or one in Ladysmith. So they will be very similar to look at them. I believe the idea that we have too is that our workbook or guide, if you will, that will be made available to the public as well as to our staff to do their engagement planning activities, will be something that we share across all of us, so that, again, that's your consistent approach every time to engagement.
Director Stone?
Those policies would be solely the discretion of the elected councils of the municipalities. We, of course, always endeavor to collaborate with our partners, but those are solely the discretion of the elected officials within the municipalities.
I'd like to test the House. Shall I call the question?
I have a point of order, Mr. Chair. And it's, I looked at the motion that's before us and that the policy be approved. If it's to be approved as written here, I'd like to fix that clunky wording, and I don't want to wordsmith it here. I'd like to perhaps amend the motion to say that the policy be approved substantively as presented. That gives staff a little bit of leeway to do some editing on the side.
Mr. Barry, what would you recommend in this circumstance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to suggest that an amending motion come forward, that the policy be amended to change the word "you" to whatever Mr. Schumacher feels is appropriate.
I was trying to avoid having to wordsmith it at this table, but if that's your recommendation, Mr. Schumacher, Mr. Chair, what's your?
I gather you're moving a motion to amend this.
Yeah, but my point is I'm not really ready with the words that would replace that, and I'd just like to leave it to staff to fix it, which is why I'm saying let's just approve this substantively as presented so that staff can do the fine tuning. And I would trust them with that. And that would be my amendment, if I can get a seconder, that we just approve it substantively as presented. And I think then there's an understanding at the staff level that that little thing needs to tweak, rather than us trying to do it here.
So I'm going to entertain the amending motion that the public engagement policy did
be approved substantively as presented.
Substantively as presented, and you're going to write that down for Mr. Barry.
Yeah,
Is there a
Mr.
second?
Barry's writing it down already.
Excellent. Is there a seconder to that? Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor? Those opposed? One opposed? The motion carries.
Too picky. God.
To the main motion. As amended. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed. The motion carries. Mr. Barry, number 1.
Yes, now that you have approved the policy substantially as presented, you can. Yeah. You may now repeal the previous, that the community engagement policy dated October 12, 2017 be repealed.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Sebring, I think. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Next item, Mr. Barry.
Moving on to section 13, public hearings. You have before you the public hearing report, minutes, and exhibits for bylaw 4226. This is Area I, official community plan amendment bylaw, and bylaw 4227, and Area I zoning amendment bylaw. And the recommendation is that the report, minutes, and exhibits be received.
Moved by Director Kuhn, seconded by Director Yanni Donardo. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Bylaws, Mr. Barry.
Bylaw 1 was deleted upon adoption of the agenda, so bylaw number 2, which is bylaw 4263. This is your 5-year financial plan, 2019-2023. Be granted first, second, and third reading, but I just want to clarify that in front of you, you have it electronically and on paper. The schedules A and B have been updated as per your decisions this afternoon.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Sebring. Any discussion? Director Wilson.
Just some clarification, please.
Microphone, please. Microphone, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just some clarification, if I could, please, on the Schedule A. There's some very large fluctuations here between the years. For instance, between 2020 and 21, there's an increase of 8.2 million, and then the following 21 to 22, a decrease of 12 million. And I can see where the figures are fluctuating, but could you explain to me why those figures are fluctuating like they are?
Ms. Weiner.
Most of the projects, it looks like, because it's not going up by any requisition, would be capital projects, which are funded through. Through the chair to Director Wilson, you'll see that the requisition is only going up slightly. Majority of it is within capital projects, which would be funded from other sources, like reserve funds, capital reserves, grant funding, and debt.
Do you have a follow-up question, Director Wilson?
No, I just need to think about that one for a little while, but I.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I will call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Two opposed, it's a recorded vote. Director Smith, Director Kuhn. That motion carries.
And now bylaw 426. Bylaw 4263, five-year financial plan bylaw for adoption.
Do we have a mover? Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Acton. It's for adoption. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Director Smith, Director Kuhn opposed. That motion carries. I don't know if congratulations is in order or not, but thank the staff for their hard work on the budget for 2019.
The year of the budget.
Mr. Berry. Next item.
The next two bylaws for electoral area directors only. Bylaw 4226, Area I, Yubo Mead Creek Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw, first be granted third reading.
Moved by Director Kuhn, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? There's one opposed. The motion carries. Director Nicholson opposed. Next item.
Bylaw 4227, Area I, Yubo Mead Creek Zoning Amendment Bylaw be granted third reading.
Moved by Director Kuhn, seconded by Director Marcotte. Any discussion? Seeing none. Call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Director Nicholson opposed. That motion carries. Next item, notice of motion. There is a item here. It will be discussed at the next meeting, and thank you for submitting that, Director Nicholson. To the next item, NB1, and it's an item of correspondence.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just if we could have clarification on the intent of this, if possible, through Mr. Berry, bringing this forward.
Are you talking about the letter?
This item that we're discussing?
No, the previous one, the public input procedure policy.
It's a notice of motion for next meeting that'll be described and outlined by Director Nicholson for the next meeting.
Okay, thank you very much.
And Mr. Chair, I was just going to say for those people in the audience and watching at home, I'll read it out.
Fair enough.
What has just been given. So Director Nicholson has put forward the following notice of motion that the public input period procedure policy be amended by replacing the words unanimous vote with the words majority vote at the end of the sentence under item 1. And Director Nicholson is indicating she will come forward with this motion at the next board meeting. So you'll have your discussion at that meeting.
Thank you, Director McGonigal. Now to NB1.
NB1, correspondence from North Cowichan regarding the proposed rezoning in Area D, Cowichan Bay, for marine manufacturing in the industrial zone, request for an environmental impact assessment.
Director Sebring.
Since I'm the signatory to this letter with the other hat that I wear, Council was very specific that the CBRD consider postponing the public hearing until the assessment is done. Given the fact that the public hearing was held last night, this was the earliest opportunity we had to get this on the agenda. I don't think, to be fair to my council, that we realized that the hearing had been scheduled for last night when this resolution was passed. in some sense, part of this resolution that was passed is a moot point because the public hearing has taken place. Equally, my council very clearly directed me to tell you that it would be our preference at North Cowichan that our environmental impact assessment would be part of this process. And that's really all I can say at this point because the process is unfolding, so we'll leave it there.
Mr. Barry, what would our next step be?
You don't need a motion to receive because it was received as information when you adopted the agenda, so it's on there. So,
So if anyone would like to have any discussion, or we can move to our next item.
which would be question period.
Is there anyone in the gallery that would like to pose a question to the chair in regards to items on the agenda? You have nothing for us today, Mr. Evans? Any other questions from anyone in the gallery? We have a motion to resolve into closed session under. No, we have to reconvene into close. Yes. So, do we need to announce to reconvene into close, or do we have to?
So, Mr. Chair, if you still have closed session material to deal with, you need to close the meeting to the public on the basis of the reason it went in the first place.
Which is?
Employee relations.
Yes. That was moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Marsh. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. 5 minutes.